Hello everyone, welcome to Dead Time Stories. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's story. The first time Evelyn saw the Pine House, it didn't look like a place where anything bad could happen. It perched at the forest's hem like a dark bird. Wood weathered to the color of smoke. Windows tall but cloudy. Pine sap sweetened the air. Underneath it, a faint metallic tang rain on rust, or a nail between teeth. She had come because of the ad, caretaker needed, minimal pay, free lodging. Must be comfortable in remote settings. It was printed in an actual newspaper, as if the house refused to live in the same world as scrolling feeds and push alerts. The woman at the handoff didn't linger. She pressed a brass key into Evelyn's palm cold enough to pinch and said, "Don't let the fire go out at night." Her smile strained. "It draws the wet, bad for the beams." Then she climbed in her truck and left gravel whispering in the ruts. Inside smelled older than dust, not dirty used, like a coat that outlived its owner. The floors bowed and sighed. A hearth crouched at the center. Stone lip blackened like a mouth that had told too many secrets. On the mantel, a cracked porcelain doll. A brass bell with a leather thong. A small framed photograph laid face down. Evelyn set her duffel in the bedroom where the wallpaper had once been roses and was now ghosts of roses. A moth landed on her wrist, powdering her skin. She shook it off gently and laughed at herself. Remote settings, she said to the empty air, auditioning her voice against the house. I can be comfortable. At dusk, fog poured between trees, and the windows turned to mirrors. She lit a single log and watched it catch with the stubborn patience of old wood. The house warmed by inches, as if it had to remember how, later. She drank tea on the floor because she didn't trust the chairs. It was so quiet she heard the kettle settle. The hearthstone ping as it cooled. The quiet deepened until it was a pressure. She slept with the bedroom door half open, the way you do when you're pretending not to be afraid. Somewhere after midnight, she woke to a soft thrum in the walls, no sound she could name. But the feeling of one, the house, maybe. Remembering voices, she pressed her palm flat to the plaster. The thrum faded like something holding its breath. She slept again. When she woke near dawn, the fire she didn't remember stoking burned steady and orange, and the brass bell on the mantel had rotated to face the room. "Okay," she said in the small kitchen, breath puffing in the chill. "I didn't do that." The kettle hissed agreeably over the sink. The world outside was only black pines soldered into a wall. Firelight behind her made the glass a faint mirror. Something moved at the edge of the clearing, only a darker dark. Evelyn leaned close until her forehead touched cold pain. The shape slid away into the trees. Or the trees accepted it back. "Branch," she told herself, "your reflection. Calm down." The faucet squealed shut, and she poured the whistle into her mug. The string from the tea bag draping like a vein. She carried the cup to the main room. The hearth cracked and shifted. A kind of tiny language. The brass bell sat quiet. Leather thong like a black tongue. On the mantel, the photograph was still face down. Her fingers hovered. She didn't turn it. It felt like reading someone's mail. Instead, she checked the door's deadbolt set. Chain across. The key in the bowl by the entry. She checked the window's latches firm. Quarter-inch of paint pinning them like moths under glass. No one came in, she said. No one. She fell asleep poor and brave on the sofa. tea cooling into a shallow stain. When she woke, the stain was gone. The cup was clean and inverted on the rack. She laughed then. A single bark that startled the birds outside. "Fine," she said to the house. "We're roommates. You're tidy. I'll put things where they go." Later, she carried wood from the shed. The shed was a square of shadow inside the daylight, its roof eaten by pine needles. She found an axe blunted to politeness, a length of chain, a coil of wire, a small jar of nails that had long ago rusted to a single object. When she came out, the clearing looked subtly different, the way a face looks different after it has decided something about you. She turned slow circles. Nothing moved. That night, she banked the fire as instructed, and when she went to the bedroom, she found the small photograph on her pillow, turned upright at last. 3 figures in front of this very hearth. A woman in a high collar, a man with a watch chain, a child whose face was blurred to a thumbprint. Evelyn carried the photo back to the mantel like a bug in a tissue. The child's face wasn't only blurred, it seemed to have been abraded, as if someone had tried to rub it out and then stopped. Ashamed of the thoroughness, the edges glinted the silvering of age breaking through the emulsion. "If this is a prank," Evelyn said to the empty room, "you have a very specific sense of humor." She dialed the number from the ad. No signal. The cheapest kind of remoteness. She tried holding the phone near the window anyway, as if the glass could transmit hope. The display offered 1 parched bar, then gave even that back. Fine. She set the phone on the mantel. The bell gave a tiny knock metal on wood without moving. She thought of heat expansion and normal house noises, and chose those thoughts like you choose shoes that won't blister, useful, if dull. She spent the day in practical tasks, scrubbed the sink until it stopped smelling faintly of pennies, aired quilts on the line, the wind moving through them in pockets. In the back room, she found a collection of caretaker leftovers, notebooks with groceries and dates, a jar of buttons and screws, a rain-specked map whose edges had been worried thin by thumbs. The notebooks read like radio static. Milk. Paraffin. Matches. Power blinked at 3:11. Remember, fire at night. Don't answer if it knocks until it knocks twice. The handwriting changed across years. Big looping bravado, narrowing to older cautious script. Then swinging back to something precisely blocky. Don't answer if it knocks until it knocks twice. Evelyn repeated, laughing because it was ridiculous to be told how to greet a door. Good. Rules. I like rules. She took the map outside and soon realized that the drawn paths through the woods didn't match the faint deer trails at all. There were small X marks, some circled, and in the margin someone had written, "Sinks here when wet." She folded the map by its old bones and put it in her jacket pocket like a talisman. At dusk, she placed the photograph on the mantel again. Face up this time. We can look at each other. She told the house, we can be normal. The fire behaved until close to midnight. When it made a sound she could not put inside normal, a little intake, like a child laughing and then deciding against it. The bell trembled on its thong, but did not ring. She woke at 2:17 to find the front door unlatched and standing exactly 2 inches open. Cold came in like an apology. She didn't scream, because screaming felt performative when you were alone. Evelyn went quietly to the door and set it back against its frame. The night pressed there hard, curious as a large animal. She slid the chain, turned the deadbolt, and stood for a long time with her forehead on the wood. "No," she whispered. "No. Thank you." The next morning, she went into town. 12 miles of cracked blacktop where weeds had reinvented themselves as thread. A general store that sold bread, screws, worms, postcards of a waterfall that looked angrier than it ought to. The clerk wore a name tag that said Mara, and a look that said, "I'm watching what you buy." Evelyn put matches, tea, oil, bread, a paper of stick-on hooks, and a slice of pecan pie on the counter. "You at the Pine House?" Mara asked, not moving the pie over the scanner. "I am," Evelyn said, choosing casual, caretaking. Mara studied her. "Firewood dry up there?" "Dry enough." "Keep it that way." Mara tore off the receipt, then paused. "You hear anything at night? You don't go outside." Evelyn let a smile flick. "Coyotes?" "Sure," Mara said, and made the cash drawer slam like the end of a sentence. "Coyotes." On the way out, an older man in a seed cap spat near the soda cooler and didn't look at her. He said to the air, "Some places don't want to be houses anymore." Back at the clearing, the Pine House had changed without moving. It seemed to lean slightly forward as she came up the path, as if meeting her halfway or listening. She put pie on a plate and set it on the mantel, some childish offering to gods she didn't believe in. The air tasted like cold iron. She rang the brass bell experimentally. It made a sound that felt too large for its size. A ring that reached under her ribs and held a single note there for a count too long. "Okay," she said, throat tight, not ringing that again. She slept hard for once, as if a decision had been made without her. Around 3, she surfaced to the crackle of the fire behaving like a fire. Then a second sound threaded it, the clear, soft rapping of knuckles on wood. 1. And stop. A long breath. Then 1 again. She propped herself on her elbows, heart up in her mouth. "Wrong number," she said. Because jokes had saved her before, she lay still. The rapping didn't return. She waited for the second knock that would make it twice, and therefore aloud. According to a dead caretaker's rules, nothing came. Eventually, the fire sank to red. The room drifted to gray. When? The new old key was heavier than it looked. She balanced it on her palm and felt a tiny tilt toward the back of the house, as though keys could point. "Treasure hunt?" she asked the empty room, and her voice sounded better than she felt. She searched. Cupboards. Nothing but ghostly ring marks and a smell of old flour. The bedroom, where the quilts breathed their slow cotton breath. The small room off the kitchen, too narrow to be anything but a thought. In the back hallway, she found a door she'd wrongly assumed was a closet. The bottom edge was scuffed into a shallow groove in the floor, as if it had been opened and closed thousands of times by someone who didn't pick up their feet. The key slid in like it had been waiting for the excuse. The lock turned with a cough. Cold stepped up from the dark below, damp. Stone. Mushrooms dreaming of light. She found a candle stub in a jar of clothespins and lit it, then felt silly and fetched her flashlight instead. The beam made the stairs into a series of decisions. The cellar wasn't large. Stone walls wept, and the earth floor rose and fell like something trying to breathe. Shelves held practical, lonely things, jars that had been boiled until they forgot their shape. A spare poker. A wooden box with dovetailed corners. The box held paper, letters, brittle enough to choose dust at a touch. She read the top one half aloud, as if to prove reading existed down here. "To any keeper after me, the bell is not for summoning, it is for refusing, if you must answer. Wait for twice. Anything with a face can be fooled by rules. If you break them, make fire, and don't look at the flue. The pictures are safest when face down. This is not advice, it is weather." Evelyn stopped. Someone had drawn a little map on the letter's back. A square labeled house, another labeled woodged, and a long, thin oval labeled long sink. Beside it, don't follow voices there. Her flashlight licked something on the far wall that caught and held light like an eye. A small round window at ground level, looking out at soil, long roots trailed by like hair. Something brushed the glass from the outside. Slow, not a paw, not quite a hand. Storm, she said. Absurdly, backpedaling up the steps, hands shaking enough that she overshot the lock twice. She got it turned on the third try. The key came with her. She shut the door gently, and then, after a second thought, pushed a chair against it because film taught her some lessons you just keep. That night, she stacked the hearth with more wood than sense. Flames rose and stayed. She watched them the way sick people watch thermometers. At 1:11, knuckles rapped once on the front door. At 1:14. Once again, at 1:18. After a pause that tasted like patience, twice. Evelyn stood and the room swam a little from how quickly she'd risen. The caretaker notes had been very clear. Don't answer until it knocks twice. All right? She whispered. All right. She went to the door and put her ear to the wood. The cold there was intense, as if someone had pressed their mouth to the other side and drawn the heat from it. Who is it? Silence. The wind moved like a slow thought through the eaves. The second knock had come. The rule said, now you may. She slid the chain, turned the deadbolt, and opened the door 3 inches tonight so thick it felt folded. Hello? Her breath made a maple leaf of fog. Child's voice, scratchy with either distance or mimicry, said, I'm lost. Evelyn's spine tightened like pulled wire. Where are your parents? A very long pause. I can't see them. Where are you standing? Sweetheart? Here. The voice came from the base of the steps now, without the sound of anyone climbing. I'm cold. The caretaker notes hadn't said what to do when twice brought a child. They also hadn't said why the child in the photograph had no face. Evelyn angled the door just enough to look, keeping her body against it so it could be shut fast. The porch was empty. The ash circle from the morning had been smeared into an oval, as if something had dragged its palm through it. Beyond the porch, the clearing was a bowl of upturned dark. Come to the light, Evelyn said, throat tight. I can't see you. Itzant kom in, the voice said from the steps behind her. She turned with a jolt and saw only the hall she just walked through. The house breathed. The fire popped like knuckles. She shut the door very softly and set the chain. I'm calling for help. She lied. Because she would have lied to a coyote too. She picked up her phone and stared at the nothing bars. Hold on, she said to the empty air, and set the phone to her ear because acting is part of survival. Hi. Yes. There's a child at. The brass bell on the mantel rang. Not the friendly clearing of a throat it had made when she tried it, but a low, sustained tone that felt like hands on either side of her head. Holding. The sound made the door quiver. The child's voice withdrew. Step by step, as if carried backwards, cold, it said once more. From the yard now. And then from the trees, soft as pine needles falling, cold. Silence. The bell's tone thinned into nothing. The fire wavered, and then remembered itself. Evelyn put her palm flat on the door again, and found it warm, as if something had pressed its mouth there this time from inside. She did not sleep. She sat in a chair by the hearth with her knees under a quilt and watched the flames consult one another. The bell had calmed, leather thong still. Thank you, she told it, feeling foolish and not caring. If that was you. When the light came, weak and milked, she went into town again because town had the illusion of answers, which beat no answers. Mara looked up before the bell over the door could finish ringing. "You should be sleeping," she said. Then, softer, "You heard something." "Knocks," Evelyn said, and a voice that said it was a child. Mara's mouth pinched, then smoothed. "Sometimes the wind will climb into a story and talk like that. I found notes in the cellar." Evelyn kept her own voice low, as if the house could travel in her throat. "They said the bell is for refusing." Mara's eyes slipped to the door, the window, the ceiling, like she was checking exits from a conversation. "The man who wrote most of those," she said finally, "was named Silas. He stayed 3 winters, had a dog that never once went down the cellar. After he left, the next keeper said it took a week to get the smell of dog fear out of the rugs." "What's the long sink?" Evelyn asked, thinking of the map and the oval, and the way soil had flowed by the cellar window like hair. "A slump in the old ground where water won't decide if it's a pond. The trees lean like they're listening. Don't go there after rain." "And before rain?" "Don't go there after rain," Mara repeated, and put a package of candles on the counter without ringing them up. "Your power will blink. That's not weather. That's the pines. They like attention. Don't give it." The man in the seed cap was there again near the soda cooler, he said to his reflection. "Some houses eat errors. If you feed them rules, they get tired." On the way out, Mara called, "If you hear your name in the trees, it isn't your name. It's a name. Keep the fire. Call your mother. She'll hear you. Even if you don't have bars." Evelyn smiled, because that last bit sounded like real kindness. Back at the Pine House, the pie plate on the mantel was licked clean in a way that suggested a tongue, not a fork. The photograph had curled slightly in the heat. The child's face was still in erase, but the man's watch chain seemed to have caught more light, a brighter thread across his waistcoat, as if something had polished it small stroke by small stroke. She rang the bell once. It made no sound this time, only a shiver in the wrist that held it. Rain arrived without asking, a steady sift that turned the clearing to skin. The fire had to work for it. The chimney drew reluctantly, and once Evelyn smelled the faint soot breath that meant smoke thought about coming back down, she opened the flue wider and refused to look into the black there. Because the letter had been clear, if you break them, make fire and don't look at the flue. She read the notebooks like psalms: fire at night, don't answer until twice, bell for refusing, photograph safest face down. She turned the mantel photo over. Sorry, she told the 3 people, their blurred child between them. We'll rest. At midnight, the rain strengthened into 1,000 small hands. The house clicked and settled. The walls made the wet, creeping sound of boards drinking. The knocks did not come. Instead, from under the floor, no. From inside the floor, she heard the soft shuffle of feet, not walking, standing and shifting, like a tired person. Weight from heel to heel. Evelyn stood on a rug and felt nothing. She stepped off and put her bare soul to the wood, and felt a faint heat move under her, like breath pulled through cloth. No, she whispered again. Because the little word had done good work before, she set another log. Watch the fire take. The bell's thong stirred, not a ring, a small consenting nod. Then, a softer sound than knocking, ash moving across ash, like writing with a finger. She found it on the cold hearthstones at the edge of the rug, a single line drawn through powder. A child's effort, one line, a pause, another. Crossing the first, an X. Her name came then. The way Mara had warned it might, Evelyn, Not from the door, from the chimney's black, not a voice she knew. A voice wearing familiarity like a thrifted coat. Evelyn, you don't have to be alone. She made her voice flat. A countertop. I'm not. The house is here. The house is tired. The voice cooed. Let the fire go out. She fed the fire until the coals brightened, and she did not look up into the flue. Not even once. Not even when something there sighed. Long and disappointed. Like a parent who knows better. She slept at last near dawn. Chin to chest in the chair. When she woke, there were wet footprints leading from the cellar door to the hearth small. Bare. Each toe distinct. They stopped just where the rug began. As if whoever had made them knew better than to step on wool. Or could not. She followed the little wet prints with a towel and a bowl of salt, laying a thin white seam along the baseboards like a stitch. This is for me, she told the house. Not for you. The salt flashed dull in the firelight. She placed a pinch on the windowsills, on the cellar latch, in a pale ring around the bell. It felt theatrical, but theater had rules. And rules were better than superstition because you could do them on purpose. She called her mother anyway. The call did not leave the phone, but speaking steadied her. I'm fine, she said to the quiet line. It's a caretaker place, long pines. You'd like the smell. I bought pie. She waited in the listening. And in that space, she heard maybe her mother's laugh from a kitchen 15 years gone, or just the kettle. I know, she said. I'll eat. I'll sleep. I'll stay asleep. She found more pictures in a narrow drawer beneath the mantel that she hadn't noticed because the wood face had no handle. Just an older, more patient seam, daguerreotypes and postcards. Curled and dark, the same hearth through years, the same wall, a catalog of sameness staging different people. A thin woman with sleeves like sails, a boy holding a toy boat, an older couple pretending not to be afraid of the camera. On the backs, sometimes a year. Sometimes we lasted the winter. One picture had writing pressed so hard the letters dented the paper. Face them or face down. But decide. She put the drawer back and felt the house accept the choice. At dusk, fog drew chalk lines between the trees. She sat a log. Then another. Then a small pyramid for later. She ringed ash on the hearthstone into a neat circle with a gap like a mouth. Door, she said, pointing to the front. No. And to the circle. No. And to the bell. Yes, she smiled at herself. We're negotiating. Sometime after midnight. The house sighed like it remembered a stare and took it. From the kitchen came a scratch. Then a faint tap-tap as if a finger politely asked a glass to move. Evelyn set her cup on the table. Careful, not tonight, she said. Choose a better story. The scratch retreated a little, sulking like rain. Daylight felt like a permission slip. She took the letter map, a thermos, and a length of twine, and went to see the long sink, while the sky was a clean sheet. The woods were not dense, but they were articulate. Every step altered the grammar of the birds. She tied twine to branches as she went. Small, soft flags back to the clearing, and said, the old trick right-hand path out. Right-hand path back, as if the forest spoke logic. The ground changed before the trees did, becoming springy. Then damp. Then the kind of wet that holds the memory of footsteps for hours. She smelled iron again, and leaf mold, and something that wasn't rot or bloom. The long sink announced itself by the way the trees behaved, leaning in, as if leaning had a center. The water was only a dish an inch or two deep, but it held the sky very seriously. On the near bank, cairns made of flat, slate-colored stones stood in a tidy row, 8 of them, each no higher than a shin, each topped with something particular: a rusted hinge, a blue marble, a spoon with the bowl dented, a ring of wood with a knot like an eye. The 5th cairn held a child's sock, stiff with time. Evelyn did not touch them. She counted, because counting is a way to be present with a thing without engaging. When she reached 8, a 9th was already there. She stared at it until her eyes watered. It wore, on top, a button from a raincoat she hadn't seen in a decade, yellow, cracked, one thread still nibbed in the shank. "Sure," she said softly, because surprise didn't help. "You can look in my pockets, but put things back." Across the long sink, a place in the trees hung wrong, darker as if wet despite the dry weather. The air tasted like an attic. Something in that dark place breathed in shallow, patient sips, the way a sleeping person will when they're listening. Evelyn took one step back, then another, then obeyed the rule she'd given herself: right-hand path back, following her own little flags like a breadcrumb choir. Once, the twine tugged against her fingers as if someone further up the line had taken it in both hands and smiled. "Not today," she said, and the tug faded, unhappy to be ordinary. At the clearing, the house seemed relieved to see her, which she had not thought houses could look. On the porch, in ash, someone had written the number 9. It was written twice. The second time pressed harder and pressed. The power blinked at noon, then at 12:07, then at 12:11, as if the house had an offbeat heart, light thinned and plumped, the fridge coughing its small compressor cough. From the radio on the kitchen shelf, she hadn't noticed a radio before, came a band of static that moved like bees, then settled into a voice so quiet it could have been a memory of a voice. "Reporting scattered roads north of long delays. Do not." "Do not what?" Evelyn asked it. Standing close, hand on the dial. The dial had no numbers, only a smooth round movement and the sensation of falling into different flavors of snow. A music found her then, a tune she knew from her grandmother's humming when storms marched something old and circular, so it never had to end, and beneath it, as a low instrument, the thud of someone knocking on wood very far away. 1 from the back door, 1 from the front. Then, as if to be helpful, 212 from the bedroom window. "Clever," she said, and meant it. The caretaker's note had not anticipated simultaneity. She stood between the front and the back and did nothing. The house held its breath, as if to listen to what she would choose. When she chose nothing, the knock subsided to a tiny dander of sound in the sill, like fingers ticking a table. She lit the lamp early. The forest looked carved. She ate the last of the pie with a spoon, scraping the crust to dust, and thought of Mara's careful eyes, and the man at the soda cooler only able to talk to glass. The bell sat on the mantel the way an animal too smart pretends not to be tame. Evelyn lifted it and felt the weight like an idea made into metal. "Refusing," she said, not summoning. She rang it. Once. A low note like a door closed kindly. The radio obliged by offering a clearer station. And in other news then. Calmly, her name, Evelyn, answered the window. She turned the radio off and carried it to the porch and set it in the rain barrel. Baptized, she told it, and came back in, dripping. The house pleased let the lamp shine steadier. When night came, it came all at once, as if the long sink had inhaled sleep. When it arrived in a slow elevator. She dreamed she was sitting in the caretaker's chair with the bell in her lap. And each time she blinked, the room changed seasons. Quilts fat with summer, quilts thin as a secret, a sprig of fir in a jar at the hearth for winter, a bowl of stone fruit stinking sweet by August. In every version of the room, someone stood just at the edge of the flue, turned away, refusing to let their face be a detail. Don't look, the rules said. And even asleep, she remembered. The dog from Mara's story came then, gray and stubborn, and put its chin on her knee with the weight that says stay. She stroked air where fur should be. I'm staying, she told the nobody dog. That's the plan. When she woke, soot ringed the crescents of her nails, like she dug into a chimney without knowing it. The cellar door's chair had shifted 1 inch, and on the wall beside it, 5 marks in chalk she hadn't put there. A schoolchild's tally. She counted aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then the 5th slashed across, beside the tally. Someone had scrawled, if you must answer. Where another voice. She laughed, and then didn't. How? She asked the empty room. And the room, obliging, sent her eyes to the back of the letter from Silas. In the margin, a recipe. Take smoke in your mouth. Hold the bell in your teeth. Say your name backwards. Then ring, only if cornered. Beneath, in a different hand, Silas, this is stupid. She went to the hearth and touched cold brick. I won't. She promised the different hands who'd left their domestic graffiti. I won't need that, thank you. On the mantel, the photograph had wrinkled subtly, like a frown. The child's erased face looked less empty, as if someone had drawn a few careful lines there in graphite and then licked their thumb and smudged them away. The man's watch chain shone overly bright again, an inch of metal declaring itself in a room that disliked declarations. I want to make this house a machine that refuses, Evelyn said, and began. She tied the coil of wire she'd found in the shed onto the window latches, tight enough that it would scream on release. She looped the length of chain through the front door's handle to a heavy iron hook she screwed into the beam above, more ritual than security. She affixed stick-on hooks in a bright practical row and hung kitchen spoons to tinkle at drafts. Bells everywhere. She told the quiet. Noisy to enter, noisy to leave. She found chalk in a drawer with twine and clothespins and wrote the rules on the back of the cellar door in block letters, so large a tired future self wouldn't miss them. Then she wrote them again, smaller, on the wall between the windows, and again, smallest, on the inside of her wrist. Wait for twice, keep fire, don't look, bell refuses, pictures down, don't follow voices, she added. After a pause, do not be clever for an audience that isn't here. At noon, she flipped the photograph face up. What are your names? She asked the 3 frozen people. The child's face resisted, but the woman's caller seemed to soften for a second, and Evelyn heard, or imagined, a whisper like cloth unlacing. Ion. The man's watch chain caught a glare of light that spelled nothing. Ion, she said, tasting the vowel. I'll say it for you. You can rest. If you need to tell me something, pick another way. The forest responded by arranging a shape on the porch while she boiled the kettle. A braid of pine needles tied with a strip of faded blue cloth, standing on its own like a small, proud spine. Someone had pushed a porcelain button into its side. The button matched one missing from the pillowcase she'd slept on. Return policy, Evelyn said. surprised into comfort. She set the braid on the mantel. The bell trilled once pleased and then went heavy, as if it remembered itself. Lightning limped over the hills in the afternoon without rain. The long sink made a long tuning fork hum she felt in her teeth more than heard. Her phone showed 1 bar, then 2, then sighed to none. A message from an unknown number blinked and vanished too fast to read, leaving afterimage words, "Come downstairs" or "Come down stars." "Spelling matters," she told the air. "Try again." Evening dragged its damp hem over the clearing. The first real thunder arrived like furniture moved upstairs. The house leaned, just slightly, toward the woods, as if eavesdropping on whatever the pines were telling one another. She set more wood, built a neat triangle like a child's drawing of a mountain, and let the flame comb it. The smoke climbed well, and she did not look where it went. The bell rang without her hand, not the deep refusing note, but a thin, bright one, like a spoon against a jar alert. Not alarm. It rang again, and again, a pattern she could not place. Long, short, long, short. She found, beneath the bell, a card she hadn't put there. A square of thick paper written in the careful, "The future will need this hand of Silas. If the bell marks, it is telling. It counts. It will tell you rain. It will tell you when." Listen to it. The paper tore there along an old crease and offered nothing else. Something heavy moved in the long sink. Not in the water, but under it. A roll and shift that made the trees tip farther in, as if to share weight. Her name came again from that direction. Not from a mouth, but from a mouth-like opening made by wind between 2 trunks. Evelyn. The voice pushed the V too hard, like it was a new consonant it wanted to practice. Evelyn. Ev-len. "I'm not a lesson," she said, and the ridiculousness eased something in her. "You'll have to pass without me." Rain came on the 3rd bell mark. So sudden and absolute it felt like a decision had just voted and won. The fire sulked, then accepted its task and worked harder. The chimney moaned in the way of places that have learned winter and imagine it in all weathers. "You may live here," she told whatever stood under the sink. "And I may live here, but I will not live there." And the pronoun pointed at a geography that wasn't on any map. Late, when her eyes had begun to shudder of their own dirty will, the bell rang once more, very small, like a child in the next room practicing sugar stealing and dropping the spoon, and dropping. She went down to the cellar on a day she would later call foolish, though at the time it felt like tidy courage. The key warmed as it turned. The air below was cold enough to edit breath. She found, in a crate beneath the workbench, a second bell iron instead of brass, rough as if cast in a less careful mold. Its thong was braided horsehair. A tag wired to it read, "This asks, don't." She set it back very gently. On the wall, chalk marks rose a full arm's length now. Not just the 5 she'd seen before. Long rows of tallies with a single scratched-out interval where someone had broken pattern and written sideways. "It knocked twice when I was not home. Does that count?" Something pawed the dirt outside the small cellar window. She stood at an angle to it, where the light would not make her face an offering. Through the glass, swile pressed, roots like long white hands combing past. Small prints appeared there, too neat for paws, too round for a man rising like bubbles in slow motion. A knuckle tapped the glass. Once, she considered rules, then considered what counted as a door in the economy of knocking. Not a door, she said. Glass, earth. The tapping stopped. Affronted, and the roots resumed their patient hair-combing journey. She leafed the caretaker notebooks for a voice that spoke to the feeling in her bones. The picture grew teeth, one said. Nonsense, until she thought of the watch chain. If they can't have a face, they'll take a jewelry. Another. Pragmatic. If you think the house wants you to stay, make it do paperwork. Give it jobs, dishes stacked, lamps trimmed, rugs beat. If it is busy with the idea of itself, it bothers you less. She almost laughed. Cores, she said. I can do that. She fetched rugs to the line and beat them until dust remembered it was dust and not history. She polished brass that tarnish had made timid. She mended the fray in the quilt and put the blue button back on the pillowcase. The house relaxed into these small obediences, the way bodies ease when given work they understand. At the edge of evening, someone placed a coin on the porch rail, a penny greened into a story. Dated a year before she was born. It looked like gratitude. The twice knock came just past 1. Clear and correct. Like it had studied. 2 measured raps on the actual door. No tricks with windows. No choruses from the back to confuse the rhythm. She stood where she always stood and put her ear to the wood. The cold was not greedy this time. It felt if a door's cold could feel this way composed. Who is it? She asked. Because the sentence deserved to exist. Evelyn. The voice used her name like a key in a lock, but did not turn it. We can trade. What for what? Another small pause. As if the weather was conferring with itself. You can sleep. It said at last. You can sleep and not wake to the sound of the floor remembering feet. I will stand outside. I will stand under the gutters and listen to water. You will wake, rested. She glanced at the hearth. The fire held. Honest. The bell was quiet. What do you want? To be invited to stand where it is warmer, the voice said, and there was something almost polite in its cadence that made her chest loosen and then tighten again. Catching itself, only to stand. You can keep your rules. 2 knocks, no crossing the rug. Evelyn opened the door 1 hand's breadth. Night stood there completely. High-shouldered with rain, nothing moved. She smelled pine. And the iron tastes like pennies on the tongue after biting a lip. Stand. Then, she said, and put her hand to the frame so the door could not swing further. Stand on the threshold. You'll be warmer by 1 degree. Something she could not see obeyed. Air thickened. Like breath making space for a second breath. The ash circle at the hearth wrote itself again into neatness. The spoons on the hooks trembled, then settled, as if a large person had found, at last, the right stillness. They stood like that, she at the door, at the line for a long time in which nothing bad happened, and rest took a cautious breath. Thank you, the voice said at last, and for 1 syllable sounded like her father when he was not yet gone. Thank you. Ev. That's not my name, she said gently, not yours to use. The something considered, and then let itself be silent. She shut the door softly. When she turned to the mantel, the photograph faced up again, though she had left it down, and the child's face had found, overnight, the faintest suggestion of a mouth, a small, careful arc, somewhere between a breath and the beginning of a word. Morning was a thick gray cloth draped over the clearing. Evelyn sat with her tea at the kitchen table, watching the forest blur in and out through the slow rain. The photograph on the mantel still faced up, the child's faint mouth, like a half-stitched seam. She told herself she'd turn it down before night. But for now, she kept glancing at it, like checking a wound for change. She decided to work indoors. Dusting was an oddly comforting act. It gave her a sense of control over the surfaces she could see, even if she couldn't account for what moved underneath them. The caretaker notebooks were back in their crate, but she reread one as she dusted. The picture will learn your house. By midday, the rain had settled into a rhythm that could almost be mistaken for knocking. If knocking came from every direction at once, she kept the fire going. The chimney's breath felt steadier now, as though it approved of her diligence. When she finally looked out the front window, she saw footprints in the clearing, not approaching the house, but circling it. Too many to count at a glance. Small. Like the ones she'd seen by the cellar window, they didn't sink deep in the mud, as if whoever made them was weightless or careful. She put her hand on the brass bell. It didn't move. It didn't need to. Later, she found something strange, a smooth white stone, perfectly round. Sitting in the center of the kitchen table, she was certain it hadn't been there when she sat down to tea. There were no wet marks on the floor. No footprints this time, just the stone, dry and warm, as though it had been held in someone's palm for hours before being set there. She held it up to the firelight. It was unmarked. But when she closed her eyes, she thought she felt an indentation like the shape of a tiny key pressed into its surface. That night, the knocking came at the usual time, once at 1:12, once at 1:15. She didn't go to the door right away. Instead, she stood by the mantel, holding the white stone, and waited. On the second knock, she asked aloud, "What's the stone for?" There was no voice, only silence. Thicker than the one she was used to. It felt expectant. "I'm not giving you anything unless you tell me," she said, trying to make her voice firm. "And if you don't talk, I'll keep it." The silence broke, but not into speech. Instead, she heard the faint scrape of wood from behind her. She turned in time to see the photograph tilt forward and fall flat on the mantel. When she picked it up, the child's faint mouth was gone again, smoothed away, as if erased. Something tapped the window by the hearth, not a knock, more like a pebble's touch. Then another. She crossed the room and peered out into the night, her reflection clouding the glass. A pale shape stood at the edge of the clearing, barely visible through the rain, small, motionless. When lightning flickered far away, she thought she saw the outline of a face, but it was turned slightly. Hiding. She stepped back. "Not tonight," she said. The brass bell rang then. One deep, resonant note that seemed to push the dark back an inch. The shape in the clearing turned and slipped into the trees without a sound. She placed the white stone on the mantel beside the bell. "You can stay there," she said softly, "until I know what you're for." I know. The weather didn't break for 3 days. The pine house felt smaller under constant rain, as though its beams were drawing inward. Evelyn busied herself with chores, oiling the hinges, sweeping ash, reorganizing the kitchen shelves, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was choosing her tasks. Every time she thought of what to do next, she'd find the needed tool already lying out, waiting. On the third morning, she noticed something unsettling. The caretaker's notes were no longer in the crate where she'd left them. She found them stacked neatly on the kitchen table. The top one opened to a page she hadn't read before. "Trade is possible. They will offer comfort for entry. Refuse comfort. It will become hunger if they leave you gifts. Keep them where they can see but not touch. This is important." Evelyn looked at the mantel, at the stone beside the bell. The firelight glinted off it, and for a moment she thought she saw a faint crack along its surface hairline, almost invisible. That night, there was no knock. Instead, a voice whispered her name from somewhere between the walls. It was low, close, and steady, as if someone had leaned right up to her ear. "Evelyn," it said. And then again, softer. "Evelyn." She forced herself to speak. "You're not getting in." The voice chuckled, not cruelly, but knowingly, and fell silent. When she woke at dawn, the stone on the mantel had split cleanly in two. Inside was a tiny, old-fashioned key, no bigger than her thumbnail. She turned the tiny key over in her palm. It was so small, it felt more like jewelry than a tool. The shaft was etched with the same strange markings as the cellar key. She checked the house for locks that might fit it. None of the doors, windows, or cabinets had keyholes that small. The only place it seemed even remotely suited to was the narrow drawer beneath the mantel, the one where she'd found the extra photographs. When she tried it, the lock turned with a delicate click. The drawer slid open further than it had before, revealing a hidden compartment at the back. Inside were 3 more photographs, all of the same child from the original picture. In each one, the face was more defined than before, but never complete an eye here, a mouth there, never the whole. In the last photo, the child was holding a small brass bell identical to the one on the mantel. Underneath the photos was a folded scrap of paper, brittle and yellowed. She unfolded it carefully. "The bell belongs to the youngest. Keep it from them. If they hold it, the rules change." She stared at the bell on the mantel, suddenly aware of how quiet the house had become. The rain had stopped, but the air felt heavier, as though the pause in weather had only made the silence sharper. That night, she put the bell away in the locked drawer, using the tiny key. "You're not getting this," she said into the empty room. From somewhere deep in the forest, 2 knocks echoed, slow, deliberate, and much too far away to be on any door. Beyond the 2 distant knocks stayed in her bones long after they faded. She sat by the fire, trying to read, but her eyes kept sliding to the drawer where the bell now lay locked away. The key, so small she feared losing it, rested on a cord she'd tied around her neck. It swung lightly when she moved, a tiny reminder. She almost welcomed the absence of knocking on the door. Almost. The pine house had its own way of making absence feel like a trap. At one point, she caught herself straining to hear anything from outside, just to know the world was still there. By midnight, the silence had taken on a different texture, dense, like something pressing against the windows from the other side. She found herself glancing toward the front door over and over, as though she expected it to simply unlatch and open. Instead, the sound came from the chimney, a long, slow inhale, like a lung filling after being held empty too long. She froze in her chair. The caretaker notes had been cleared, "Don't look at the flue," and she didn't, but the sound went on, and she could feel the faintest draft curling into the room, cold as riverstone. Then came the voice, not the child's this time, but something older, lower, and tired. "Evelyn," it said, "the bell isn't yours." She didn't speak. "You can't keep it," the voice continued. "If you do, it will ring without you." "Still." She said nothing. The fire cracked sharply, sending a spray of sparks toward the hearth, and then just for a moment she swore she heard the faint, distant chime of a bell, muffled as though buried under soil. The next morning, she checked the locked drawer. The bell was still there, its surface cool and dull, but the tiny key around her neck was warm, as if it had been held in a closed fist all night. She decided to busy herself outside. The ground was soft after days of rain, the forest air full of the smell of wet pine and earth. She gathered kindling, stacking it in neat bundles beside the shed. It wasn't until she returned to the porch that she noticed something new. The ash circle she'd left there had been disturbed, not smeared, but redrawn. Now it formed a spiral, turning inward toward a single small stone in the center. When she picked it up, she realized it wasn't a stone at all, but a button. Not like the blue one she'd found before. This one was bone white, and smooth enough to almost glow in the overcast light. She carried it inside and placed it on the mantel. The photograph of the family had changed again. The child's mouth had returned, faint but visible. And now one eye had appeared as well, dark, sharp, and looking directly at her. That night, she locked the front door, the back door, and every window twice. She placed the bell and the bone button in the locked drawer and went to bed. At some point after midnight, she woke to find the tiny key still on its cord missing from her neck. She got out of bed slowly, scanning the floor for the key. Nothing. She checked the cord. It was still tied. Just empty. Panic itched on her skin. The drawer was still locked. Though, she pulled on it just to be sure. No movement. But when she touched the wood, she thought she felt something faintly tapping from the inside. The taps were irregular, sometimes a single knock, sometimes two close together. She leaned closer, trying to make sense of it, and heard the faintest sound of metal shifting. Not yours. A child's voice whispered from inside the drawer. She backed away, heart hammering. The fire popped in the hearth, startling her enough that she almost turned to look up the chimney. She caught herself in time. By morning, the key was back around her neck. It was colder than the air in the room. So cold that holding it made her fingers ache. She didn't take it off for the rest of the day. But she couldn't stop thinking about the drawer and whether the bell inside was truly quiet. The pine house seemed to lean closer to her that day. Every creak of the floorboards felt deliberate. She could hear the rain beginning again outside, a soft patter that built into steady drumming by mid-afternoon. When she checked the porch, the spiral of ash was gone. In its place was a circle of small stones, each one white as bone, perfectly arranged. At the center sat a brass key full-sized this time, old and ornate. She picked it up and felt the same faint pull she'd felt with the cellar key, as if it were pointing somewhere. But when she walked through the house, it didn't match any of the locks. By nightfall, the knocking returned. 2 knocks, correct and patient, on the front door. She didn't answer. Instead, she sat by the fire and waited. After a long pause, 2 more knocks came from the back door, then the side window, then, impossibly, from beneath the floorboards. The knocks stopped, and she heard the faint ring of the bell from inside the locked drawer. She didn't open it. She dreamed of the long sink that night. In the dream, the water was perfectly still. Reflecting the moon with such precision, it looked like a second sky. She stood on the bank, holding the brass bell, and on the opposite shore stood the child from the photograph's face, now fully visible. They smiled at her. "Ring it," the child said, and their voice was soft and warm. Nothing like the cold mimicry she'd heard before. In the dream, she lifted the bell and rang it. The sound was deep, resonant, and seemed to pull the trees closer, bending toward the water. The reflection of the moon rippled, and from beneath it, hands reached up toward the surface. She woke with her heart pounding and the taste of metal in her mouth. The drawer was still locked, but the brass bell was sitting on the mantel. She never heard it open. Evelyn stared at the mantel, at the bell that should have been locked away. She didn't touch it at first. The fire's glow painted the brass in deep gold, making it look almost alive. She checked the drawer. Locked, key still around her neck, but the weight in the drawer was wrong lighter. As though something had been removed, she thought about the caretaker's note. If they hold it, the rules change. She picked the bell up with a dish towel, unwilling to feel the metal against her skin. It was warmer than the air. The handle was faintly damp, as though it had been outside in the rain. When she set it back down, the photograph on the mantel shifted just slightly. The tiniest scrape of glass on wood. Now the child's face was fully formed. Both eyes. A small, knowing smile. She turned the picture face down and stepped back. The fire cracked, sending up a flurry of sparks. And for just a heartbeat, she thought she heard the faint ringing of the bell again. Muffled, but insistent. The knocks didn't come that night. Instead, there was a sound from the roof, slow footsteps pacing back and forth. As if someone were deciding where to stop. Every few steps, a pause. She sat in the chair by the fire, pretending not to listen. But each pause stretched longer. The stillness heavier, until she could almost feel someone crouched just above her. She told herself she wouldn't look out the window, wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her seek them out. But when she finally did glance toward the glass, she saw the faintest reflection of movement, something leaning over the eaves to peer down at her. It pulled back before she could catch the shape. At dawn, she went outside. No footprints in the mud. No broken shingles. Only a single brass button, resting on the porch rail. It matched none of her clothes. She left the button on the mantel beside the bone-white one. The bell sat between them. Quiet, but not still. She kept catching it at a slightly different angle, as if it had been turned to listen. That afternoon, she decided to check the cellar again. The pull of the unknown key in her pocket was too strong to ignore. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she saw something new. The roots outside the small window had been cleared away. Through the glass, she could see soil pressed flat, like a palm against it from the other side. The shelves in the cellar had shifted since her last visit. The wooden box she'd seen before now sat open, empty. On the workbench was a piece of paper weighted by a small, round stone. The paper was blank except for one faint line in pencil, rules or weather. The stone was warm. She left it where it was. That night, she heard movement from inside the walls, not scurrying too slow for rodents. This was deliberate. A sound that made her think of someone sliding their hands along the inside of the wood, feeling for weak spots. She built the fire high, keeping her eyes locked on the flames. The caretaker's notes had been clear about the fire being a barrier. At 2:14, the voice came again. This time it wasn't the child. It wasn't the low, tired one from the flu. It was multiple voices, layered together like overlapping breaths. "Evelyn," they said in unison. "The bell is ours." She didn't answer. "Give it," they said, almost kindly. "You'll sleep. You'll wake somewhere warm." She shook her head, though they couldn't see it. "No," she whispered. The bell on the mantel trembled once and stopped. Morning brought fog so thick she could barely see the tree line. The pine house felt like the only thing left in the world. On the porch, she found another ash circle. This one was larger, nearly 3 feet across, and in the center lay the photographs, every one she'd found in the drawer arranged in a fan. The child's face in each was now fully visible. She gathered them carefully and brought them inside, placing them face down on the table. The bell sat where she'd left it, between the 2 buttons. She made tea. The kettles whistled loud in the heavy silence, but when she returned to the table, The photographs were face up again, though she'd been certain she'd flipped them. The child's smile seemed wider. The rain returned in the afternoon, bringing with it the smell of earth and something metallic. Evelyn checked the cellar dry. For now, but she could hear water trickling somewhere beneath the floorboards. She spent the day in the kitchen, baking bread as a distraction. The simple, solid work kept her hands moving, kept her from looking toward the mantel too often. When the bread was cooling on the counter, she stepped outside to bring in more wood. The fog had thickened again, but she noticed something on the far side of the clearing, a row of cairns like the ones she'd seen at the long sink. These were new. 5 of them, each topped with a button. The last cairn held a small brass bell, not hers smaller, tarnished. The handle bent. She didn't touch it. That night, the knocking came in 3s wrong, off pattern, insistent. She didn't answer. Then came the sound of the bell again, but not from the mantel or the drawer. This one was outside, somewhere in the fog. It rang once, then twice, then once again. Heskint. The caretaker's notes had never mentioned 3. She stayed by the fire until it was nearly dawn. The bell outside ringing at irregular intervals. Sometimes it was faint, as if far away. Sometimes it sounded like it was right beside the wall. When the light finally broke, she opened the door just enough to look out. The fog was lifting, and the cairns were gone. Only wet earth remained. Evelyn decided to make one change to the house's defenses. She placed the bell back in the locked drawer and set both buttons inside with it. Then she pushed the heavy chair against the drawer, the way she did with the cellar door. She didn't know if it would help, but it made her feel steadier. For the rest of the day, the pine house was almost peaceful. She could hear the wind moving in the pines, the occasional creak of the beam's normal sounds. It wasn't until evening that she noticed the key around her neck had grown warm again, warmer, in fact, than it had ever been. And from somewhere deep in the forest came 2 knocks, clear and deliberate, then silence. She went to the fire, added more wood, and said softly, "Not tonight." The house seemed to exhale, the beams easing as if they'd been holding their breath. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the next knock might not wait for her permission. The next morning was clear, cold, and bright enough to make the frost sparkle on the porch rail. Evelyn almost felt normal carrying in the firewood, but when she stepped inside, the air was warmer near the mantel, and thick with the faint scent of pine sap. The locked drawer was open. She froze in the doorway, the woodpile slipping from her arms, logs rolling across the floor. Inside the drawer sat the bell, both buttons, and the small ornate key she'd kept on the cord around her neck. The cord was unbroken, still looped like a noose in the collar of her sweater. She didn't touch anything. Instead, she closed the drawer slowly, locked it, and stepped back. "I'm not playing this game," she said, not sure who she was speaking to. From the chimney came the faint sound of breathing, 3 short inhales. A pause, then 1 long exhale, like something settling deeper into a narrow space. She decided she couldn't stay inside all day. The air in the pine house felt like a held breath, and she needed sky over her head. The path to the long sink was soft underfoot, still damp from the last rain. Her twine markers from before were gone, every scrap of string stripped from the branches. When she reached the water, the cairns she remembered were now twice as tall, each topped with something from her own belongings: a spoon from the kitchen, a sock, one of her hair ties, The ninth cairn held a photograph of the family. The glass was cracked straight across the child's face. She didn't take it back. On the far bank, the trees leaned closer together, and in the shadow between their trunks, she thought she saw movement small, shifting, never stepping forward, watching. She turned and walked back without looking behind her. That night, the knocking came in perfect rhythm. 2 knocks. A pause, then 2 again. She didn't move from her chair. The fire was strong. The brass bell locked away, and she decided that holding her ground was better than answering. The knocks stopped. The silence stretched so long she began to think it was over. Then, from upstairs, a place she hadn't explored because she'd assumed there was no second floor, came the creak of footsteps, slow, steady, directly above her. She gripped the arms of the chair. Every muscle locked. The pine house didn't have stairs. She was sure of it. The footsteps moved toward the center of the ceiling, then stopped. From the locked drawer, the bell rang once. She waited until morning before checking the upstairs. There was no staircase. Just the same low ceiling she'd always known. The sound last night had been impossible. Still, she searched the rooms again. Nothing had changed except for the photograph on the mantel. The crack across the child's face was gone, as though it had healed overnight. She turned it face down. When she returned from bringing in wood, it was upright again. By afternoon, the key around her neck had grown warm enough to leave a faint mark on her skin. She pulled it off and set it on the table. But an hour later, it was back around her neck. She hadn't felt it slip over her head. The house was claiming her, piece by piece. She decided to take the caretaker notebooks into town. Maybe Mara would know what to do. The drive felt longer than usual, the road bending where it hadn't before. When she reached the general store, Mara was outside sweeping the steps. "You're pale," Mara said immediately. "Has it been knocking?" "Yes," Evelyn said. "But not just that, it's inside. And the bell." Mara's eyes sharpened. "You still have the bell?" "Yes, locked away." "Keep it that way," Mara said. "And if you ever find yourself wanting to give it over, leave. Don't say goodbye. Just go." The man in the seed cap came out of the store and muttered without looking at her. "Some houses don't let you leave." Back at the pine house, she placed the notebooks on the mantel. That night, the knocking didn't come. No voices. No footsteps. The absence was worse. She woke near dawn to find the fire out. Though she'd banked it carefully before bed, the air was heavy with cold. In the middle of the hearth sat the bell, its brass gleaming as if newly polished. The locked drawer was still locked. She didn't remember putting the bell there. She returned the bell to the drawer. Locking it twice, the key burned against her skin the rest of the day. As evening fell, a wind picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of wet earth and iron. From the forest came a faint, rhythmic sound, not knocking, not footsteps, but something being dragged through the leaves. She stayed by the fire until the sound stopped. When she opened the door in the morning, there were tracks in the clearing, 2 parallel lines leading straight to the porch, stopping just short of the ash circle she'd laid weeks ago. She thought about leaving. She even packed a bag close. The caretaker notes, the tiny key. But when she reached the edge of the clearing, the forest felt wrong. The trees leaned in, their trunks too close together, as if they'd closed ranks. She turned back. Inside, the fire was out again. The bell sat on the mantel between the 2 buttons, and this time there was something new beside it, a small brass chain, identical to the one in the photograph around the man's waist. She put it in the drawer without touching it bare-handed. That night, she dreamed she was standing in the clearing. The pine house was behind her, the long sink ahead, in the reflection of the water. She saw herself, but the bell was in her hand, and the child stood at her side, smiling. When she woke, the key was ice cold against her skin. The fire was out again, and from deep in the forest came the sound of a bell, ringing once, twice, then once again. She didn't know if the rules still applied. She kept the fire burning all the next day, refusing to let it go out, but the air inside the pine house was still cold, as if something had already found a way in. At dusk, the knocking began, 2 at the door, 2 at the window, 2 from the chimney. The bell in the drawer rang once. She didn't move. Then the voice came, low and close, from just behind her chair. "It's warmer by the fire," it said. She turned. No one was there, but the photograph on the mantel was face up again, and the child's smile was wider than she'd ever seen it. The front door groaned against the wind as Maya slid the chain lock into place, her hands trembling from the cold that seemed to seep not just into her skin but into her bones. The living room smelled faintly of pine and something sharper like rusted iron. She scanned the corners, her eyes darting to the shape of the old grandfather clock, its pendulum swinging with an oddly sluggish rhythm. "Don't turn around," whispered a voice behind her left ear. Her whole body stiffened. She could feel the warmth of breath against her skin. Though she was alone in the room, her throat closed, but her voice cracked out anyway, brittle and dry. "Who's there?" The silence stretched too long, broken only by the ticking of the clock. She finally dared to turn slowly, carefully, only to find nothing but the darkened hallway yawning back at her. But her gaze caught something in the reflection of the glass on the grandfather clock, a figure standing in the kitchen doorway, pale, motionless, and head slightly tilted as though listening. Maya's breath hitched. She spun toward the kitchen, but it was empty, save for the faint swinging of the overhead lamp, like someone had brushed past it seconds ago. Her phone vibrated violently in her pocket, the sudden noise making her jump. It was a text from Luke. "On my way. Don't open the door for anyone." She typed back, "Hurry," but the little delivered checkmark never appeared. The house creaked. A long, slow groan from the ceiling above. She remembered the attic door, still hanging open from earlier. Her mind screamed at her to stay put, to wait for Luke. But something in her chest, a mix of dread and reluctant duty, pulled her toward the stairs. Each step up was colder than the last, as though the temperature dropped in increments the higher she climbed. Shadows pooled at the edges of the hallway. When she reached the attic door, she saw it. Footprints, bare. Wet footprints trailing away from the attic stairs into the far guest room. The prints were smeared at the edges, like the person had been dragging their feet. She swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. "Hello?" From the guest room came a faint scraping sound. The door to the guest room was ajar, just enough to see the corner of the bed. Maya pushed it open slowly. The smell hit her first mildew and something coppery. On the bed lay a child's porcelain doll, its head cracked, one eye missing. It was wrapped tightly in yellowed bedsheets like a crude shroud. She stepped closer. The scraping sound stopped. "Maya." The voice was right beside her, even though she was alone. Her knees buckled, and she stumbled backward into the hallway, heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. The light at the end of the hall flickered. Between each blink of light, The doll seemed closer first on the bed, then on the floor, then halfway across the hallway. The final flicker left her in total darkness. She didn't wait to see what happened next. She turned and bolted for the stairs. Halfway down, the banister rattled violently under her grip, as if someone were shaking it from below. She let go and stumbled the rest of the way, her socks sliding on the polished wood floor. She lunged for the front door, fumbling with the lock, when something banged hard against the wall in the living room. It sounded like a heavy body throwing itself against the plaster. Maya. This time the voice was deeper, dragging her name out until it was almost unrecognizable. She backed toward the kitchen, grabbing the largest knife from the block, the metal cold against her sweaty palm. She didn't believe for a second it would help. Her phone buzzed again, another text from Luke. "Don't go outside. I'm here." But something's wrong. Through the frosted glass of the front door, she could see a silhouette, tall, still, head tilted at that same unnatural angle. The figure outside didn't move, even when the wind rattled the porch railings. Maya's breath fogged the glass as she leaned closer, trying to make out details. That was when she noticed its feet weren't touching the porch floor. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She backed away, clutching the knife tighter. The overhead light flickered, dimmed, and then failed completely, leaving only the soft glow from the street lamp outside. A single knock echoed through the house, not from the door, but from the back hallway leading to the basement. Her phone vibrated again. Another text from Luke. "Don't open the door. That's not me." Her stomach lurched. She turned back toward the front door, but the silhouette was gone. The porch stood empty under the pale yellow streetlight. Something shifted behind her. She whirled around to see the basement door slowly creaking open, the hinges shrieking in protest. Cold air breathed out from the darkness below. The darkness in the basement was thicker than night. Swallowing the weak light from the kitchen, she stepped closer, her own reflection faintly visible in the glass panel of a framed photo on the wall. But as she moved, the reflection didn't. She froze. The reflection tilted its head just like the figure on the porch and grinned. A loud crash sounded from below, like furniture being overturned. The reflection's mouth moved, though no sound came. Then, in her ears, as clear as if whispered from inches away, "Come down." The knife shook in her hand. She wanted to run, to flee into the night, but her legs carried her forward. Down the first step, then the second, the air grew damp, smelling of mold and stagnant water. Halfway down, her foot landed in something wet. She looked down and saw water pooling across the stairs, rippling not from her movements, but as though something beneath the surface was shifting. From the bottom of the stairs came the sound of breathing slow, deep, inhumanly steady. A shape began to emerge from the shadows, hunched and too tall, its limbs bending wrong. Maya. It said her name like it was testing the word, tasting it. She took a step back, the water sloshing around her ankles. The thing moved forward, its head still tilted, its grin stretching impossibly wide. Behind it, she could see shapes, dozens of them standing in the darkness. Her phone buzzed one last time. Run, basement window, now. She didn't think, didn't look back. She turned and splashed toward the tiny ground-level window at the far end. Her fingers fumbled at the latch, heart slamming in her chest. The creature's footsteps, if that's what they were, grew louder, closer. The latch gave way. She shoved the window open, the cold night air hitting her face just as something icy and strong closed around her ankle. The world tilted. The knife clattered from her hand. And then nothing but darkness.